What is your best I have good news and I have bad news story? Good news, it's very unlikely to be cancer. Bad news, if we biopsy it and are wrong, the cancer could get into your blood and things would be much worse. We agreed it was best to just take the whole thing. Kidney. Turns out it was not cancer, but had pre-cancer cells, whatever that means. Pilot over the intercom. I have good news and bad news. The good news is, we're approaching Boston now. Long pause. The bad news is, we aren't cleared for landing for another hour, so we're circling around the city. The pause was only a few seconds, but they were a long few seconds. Pilot, more good news, though, I'm bringing in anyway. Mind the fasten seatbelt sign, folks, and get your cameras ready. You're gonna wanna put this one on Facebook. Good, I got a promotion at work, a big one. I decided to call my fiancée to tell her the news as she was visiting her parents. Bad, she wasn't with them and was cheating on me. Update, I thank everyone for the thoughtful comments. It has been tough, I will not lie, but I am making it. Going to see a therapist next week because I still have some bad days, but on the flip side, I can afford it. That's actually good news you found out before you married. My birth. My grandparents' house burned to the ground 2 days before I was born. My grandparents were staying at my parents' house and then my mom went into labor. The calls family members were getting were pretty funny. Bad news. Larry and Mary's house burned to a crisp. Good news, but there's a baby. Born amidst salt and smoke. Sheriff's deputy walks into the store I'm managing. Good news, I'm not taking you to jail right now. Bad news, we have you on video and audio tape selling a beer to a minor. Earlier that day I had been told I was being promoted, so I went from promoted to fired in the same day. Bad news, your position at the company has been terminated and you are no longer employed. Good news, your official termination date is 10 days from now, which means you will pass your hire date, giving you 30, instead of 28, weeks of severance pay. To my wife. Good news, I found your glasses. Bad news, with a weed whacker. Back when I worked at Staples print department, couldn't figure out how to order something for a client. At the end of my shift I walked up to my manager and said, good news, I found out how to order whatever and wrote it down so we'll know next time. Bad news, I quit. Was planning on quitting that day anyway, but this was just the best, I couldn't not do it. He didn't believe me even after my written letter to leave. Haha, I managed a Staples print department for a couple months before they closed our store. I just kinda got thrown in the department. There was barely any training, and whenever I asked one of the higher up bosses for help they were either stupid or acted stupid. I'm glad they closed that store and I got a severance. I wasn't going to last long anyway. Okay, so a little backstory first. A few years ago, me and my brother found a fish in an almost dried up pond. We took it home in a bucket, filled a tank with water for him, and fed him. We called him Bruce. Problem was, Bruce only swam upside down. Morning came and I checked to see how he was. Later on my brother woke up, so I told him I had some good and bad news. The good news was that Bruce was right way up. Bad news was that he was dead. That fish ain't right. Your mom survived her aneurysm and is waking up. She doesn't recognize you as her son or at all really. I spent my 60th birthday in an ICU waiting room. One of the most painful moments in my life was her recognizing all the family in the room except me, her youngest son. I spent the next few months helping her learn to use the bathroom again and changing her diapers. Fortunately she gained most of her memory back and began to remember her baby boy. Good lord, glad it worked out, but god dang, what a nightmare. A company of Marines in infantry training school has been cleaning rifles for the last 4 hours and most of us are hurriedly finishing up in anticipation of weekend libo, weekend free time after a full week of training. A combat instructor come out from the top deck of the barracks and addresses the company. At ease 3rd, I have some good news and some bad news. Which would you like to hear first? 3rd platoon unanimously. Bad news first. There will be no libo this weekend. A wave of irritation and hopelessness befell the company. Laughing he said, do you want to hear the good news? The company said yes. I just saved 15% on my car insurance by switching to Geico, he said laughing and walked off. Frick that guy. He is my new favorite awful person. Good news is we found a family who actually wants to adopt a 9 and a 12-year-old. Bad news is that it will be a closed adoption and your parents gave up all legal rights. Can this go the other way around? My brother killed himself on a Sunday from depression around being unemployed, in debt, and unable to provide for his family. Monday, he got an email from a place he'd been interviewing at for several months that he got the job. Ah crap. Depression does terrible things to good people. Mom, we found your hamster in the basement and we're not mad, but it's dead because hamsters can't live on peanut butter and bread. I was watching a war documentary. This was the dialogue. Doctor, I have good and bad news. Which one would you like first? Soldier bad. Doctor, while you were under we had to amputate both your legs. The good news is, the guy in the next room wants to buy your shoes. That sounds like MASH. Just last week. Bad news. Lost my temp job. My first income in 9 months or so, due to reorganizing. Good news. The next day, I found out I finally passed the bar exam. Yay. Congratulations on passing. Hopefully you find a better job soon. Went to a doctor because of a sore on my dong. I had been engaging in some high risk activity. Had some tests done. The good news was that I didn't have HIV. The bad news was that I had syphilis and chlamydia. Slow clap. Picked up my wife from the airport. We had been trying to have a baby for a few months and she was flying to see me while I worked out of state. While driving out of the airport she dropped this on me. Wife. Good news. I'm pregnant. Me. Yay, looks at sonogram. Wait. What's that? Wife. That's the other one. I had to pull over before I had a wreck. And for what it's worth, twins was the best thing that ever happened to us, but it was scary as heck at the time. That said, we named them Alexis and Zoe. AZ and I'm done. Phew. I was totally thinking she was going to say, but the bad news is, it's not yours. Freaking Reddit. Not sure how many will get this one, and it might need more explaining than this, but I'll clickbait you with the good news bad news first and explain more if anyone is curious. This actually happened the other day at where I work, a construction office. Co-worker. Well, boss, I got good news and bad news. Boss, alright. Well, let me hear the good news first. Co-worker. Good news is I grabbed the key before they could turn on the backhoe. Boss, okay. What's the bad news? Co-worker. They filled up the backhoe with concrete, retarder, not diesel. It was a fun day. Yes please. Explain more. Good news is your pet survived through the night. Bad news is that he is crashing right now and we are trying to keep him alive long enough so you can see him one last time. My birthday weekend in 2013 fits this pretty well. Friday I got a big promotion at work from software engineer to management. Saturday was my birthday. Sunday afternoon my dad passed away at the age of 63. Worst birthday present ever. Hey, my birthday in 2000 is similar. Out celebrating my birthday, my baseball team lost the World Series in Game 5. I turned 20 the next day. A few days later, my dad died. Wait, I didn't have a good news. Wanted to get on birth control in college. The doctor just wanted me to get tested for 3 STDs before I did. No big deal. Always better to know, right? One was HIV and I don't even remember what the other 2 were. They left a voicemail with the results. The good news is the chlamydia herpes whatever came back negative. The bad news is the HIV didn't come back negative. I felt my heart stop. The test had been inconclusive so I had to wait a month and take it again. Longest month of my life wondering if and how I was going to explain I had HIV and that I wasn't even sure who I'd gotten it from. In the end it was negative, so it's more like good news. Delayed good news. We've got to a place in a psychiatric ward. The relief of finally getting help followed by the realization that I truly messed up. The idea of someone taking me seriously and then finding out I wouldn't go home for another year. Backstory. Hated my job at current location and had already quit. Apartment complex wouldn't let me out of lease. 6 months and out of 12, even if they took deposit. Started a business in another city about an hour away. So I was visiting my parents on Memorial Day weekend when I get a call on the Tuesday after. Business partner is on the phone. Knowledge slave. I've got some good news and some bad news. Which do you want first? Bad news. I said. Well, your apartment burned down. In the good, I asked. You're out of your lease. The good news is that at 3 AM I finally got the code to compile. The bad news is that I brushed my teeth with your toothbrush. I thought it was mine. Our coding, when it finally compiles. In college, I was in charge of monitoring students on academic probation that were part of a student organization I was in. Good news, we only have 5 students on academic probation, down from 8. Bad news, because 3 got kicked out. My dad to me and my sister after my grandpa died from cancer. I have good and bad news, guys. Which you wanna hear first? Good daddy. Okay, your grandpa got out of the hospital today. Whoa, that's awesome. What is the bad news? He is dead. Took me 15 seconds to process the information. That's some dark humor. When I was 16 I went to the doctors because of intense back pain. Turns out I'd fractured my spine. 0.4 years before and it had healed wrong with the bone pinching a nerve. I'd been in pain the whole time. But my parents don't believe in doctors, so it took the whole 4 years for my grandparents to convince them to get me in to see someone. Anyway, they were all, good news is we can do surgery and fix the bone. Bad news, the nerve damage is permanent and even with the surgery you'll still feel all the pain. Yeah, that was a tough day. Parents who don't believe in doctors shouldn't be parents. In high school my basketball team was running a mile. To run a mile one had to make 2 laps around our school, which included crossing the exits to road. My friend was running through the exit and a car didn't see him and ran over him. It was a truck and he did survive and made a complete recovery. I was the first person to see him. As I was running to our gym to get our coach, I saw his mom. To which I basically said, the good news is, your son is alive. The bad news, he was run over by a truck. I will never forget her scream as she took off running towards him. Good news, the doctors finally figured out what was wrong with my ankle. Bad news, it's the exact same diagnosis that I mentioned when I first came in. My doctor just shrugged it off and didn't believe me. Long story short, I've been living with a nearly completely torn Achilles tendon for over 3/4 of a year, walking to college classes. Interesting evening. Heading down the road to go shopping, and as we pass a certain location there is this exceptionally strong smell of natural gas. About a half hour later, going back home we see a utility truck looking for the gas leak. Get back home and about 15 minutes later, get a call out for the volunteer fire department for a motor vehicle fire. Yep, the utility company truck is burning. The driver parked the truck right on top of the leak. I can just hear the guy calling his boss. Boss, good news, I found the big gas leak on 3rd Street. The bad news, I need a new truck. The truck was burned down to the metal starting to melt. It was a very hot fire. Last Wednesday, the 20th of April 2016, my boss told me that we were having the best year financially since 2009. 4 hours later he told me that he was forced by his boss to let me go, with no explanation. Stupid but right to work state. It sucks, but half the time, even though it makes no sense, the reasoning is, you guys made a profit, but our other businesses didn't, so we have to cut costs somewhere. Since you're the most profitable, you're the ones who can most afford to cut costs. Fire someone. When I was 5, my parents said that we would be getting a puppy on a particular day, as that's when she would be big enough to leave her mom. I think it was the 7-week mark from her birthday. A week before that day, my parents woke me up really early and used the good news bad news line. My heart dropped when I heard that we wouldn't be getting our puppy the next week. Fortunately, they were quick to explain that we were getting her that day instead, as she was eating solid food earlier than predicted. This one isn't as painful as the other ones. Late to the party as usual, but still, Bad news. The damage to your left testicle is too severe for it to be saved. Surgery has been scheduled immediately and the nurses will be by to prep you in a few minutes. Good news. We saw a small tumor on the testicle we removed. We're going to be running some additional tests but we're confident we got all of it. Several tests later confirmed that it was in fact early stage cancer and they did get all of it. Never thought I'd wind up being happy about a kick to the nuts. The Pope is in his chambers. His secretary comes in and says, "Your Excellency, I have good news and I have bad news." The Pope says, "What is the good news?" "The good news is Jesus Christ has returned. He's on the phone and he wants to talk to you." "What's the bad news?" "The bad news is he's calling from Salt Lake City." Ooh, I like this way too much. Not me personally, but for anyone getting STDs. The good news is that she fricked me like no one else and is ready to do it again. The bad news is that I now have herpes. Good news, you can only get herpes once. D. My mother had a cute one about how her and my dad were first paired up. They lived across town in Karachi. My dad had met her once and told my grandma that he liked her. My grandma has my dad's friends do some research. Stalking, I'm assuming. And they found out that she was recently engaged. They went to my grandma and said, "We have good news and bad news." Grandma asks for the bad news first, and they told her that the girl her son was interested in just got engaged. Then she asked for the good news, and they said there was a lovely girl across town that just got engaged. Fast forward a month or so, and my mother's engagement was broken off because reasons. My dad's friends catch wind and go back to my grandma and again say, "We have good news and bad news." She asked for the good news this time, and they told her that that girl's engagement broke off, and she's now available. When she asked for the bad news, they told her that the engagement of that lovely girl across town was broken off. I always loved that story. Pakistani in the house. D. I was living with my ex-GF and she had a pet rabbit. It was mid-spring and we would put the thing's cage out on the balcony when the weather was nice enough, mainly because he was a hatful prick that liked to kick pea-soiled bedding all over the place and chew on anything that got close enough to the cage, and the GF was useless and lazy and didn't like cleaning the cage as often as she should have. Either way, I go to feed the thing because she can't be bothered to get up off the couch and quit playing Pokemon long enough to do it. So I fill the scoop and comment that the bin is about empty and we should go to the store today. I open the balcony door and see the dead stiff rabbit on the floor of his cage and signs that a large hawk or owl or something had tried to get at him, obviously scaring the dumb thing to death. First words out of my mouth as I turn around to look at my GF are, "Well, I guess we don't have to go buy that rabbit food now." Doesn't sound like you guys are going to get another rabbit, but just in case, they can be litter trained. We use a box that has a grate on top and he pees poops in there. Rabbit.org has tons of great info. Reminds me of the joke about the President Clinton finding Clinton sucks written and pee in the snow on the lawn. FBI says, good news is we know whose urine it is. It's Al Gore's. The bad news is that it's Mrs. Clinton's handwriting. Overheard my father telling this to poker buddies when I was 10. Me laughing in the background got a bigger laugh than the joke. Meet a patient with 2 fractured lower arms. Good news, you'll have a great excuse to ask girls for hand jobs now. Bad news, you're going to have to find one willing to wipe your butt as well. Could just get his mum to do it for him. My friend accidentally shot himself in the face. The friend who broke the news to us initially forgot to mention that he survived with only minor injuries, scaring the crap out of all of us. Told to me by a friend. Her roommate, or sorority sister, came home after a date, and everyone asked her how it went. I've got good news and bad news. What's the good news? I've met the man I'm going to marry. Whoa. So what's the bad news? He's an idiot. It didn't happen to me directly, but I was on both sides of the good bad news. When my father passed, word hadn't yet gotten around my extended family how sick he had gotten. Additionally, word hadn't gotten around that I was engaged, so they ended up getting both tidbits of news within hours days. My cousin went to the hospital to give birth at the same time my grandmother, and my cousin's grandmother, went to the hospital for a fall which ended up killing her. It was a lot of strange conversations. How's it going here? It's not looking good. And upstairs? It is very exciting. Bad news. You have cancer. Good news. It's thyroid cancer. 90% cure rate with 90% return rate. That was a tough pill for my wife and I to swallow. Had my thyroidectomy shortly thereafter and am 1.5 years cancer free. Good news. My father was finally able to pay back his parents all the money he had borrowed over the years. It was his way of proving to his folks he wasn't a screw up. He wanted so desperately to make them proud. The bad news. His mom passed away on his birthday. All the money he'd paid them went to paying for her funeral. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.